May 23rd meeting of the North Regional Plan Implementation Committee to order and ask if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll just face towards the screen. Okay. I've been promised we'll get a flag by next time.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, we gotta get on.
So let's go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Phil Cromer, City of Beaufort.
Alice Howard, Beaufort County Council.
You're my boss and Beaufort County Council, District 1.
You'll go with you, Jeff. Jeff.
Are we migrating? Dan Willis sitting in for Mayor Phillips, Town Hall.
Jerry Ashmore, Town Board.
Mike Tomey, City of Beaufort. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. We do have a quorum today, so that's good. FOIA information has gone out, and I guess I'll ask for a review and or motion on the minutes from April 25th.
Move accept minutes of April 25th.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, signify by raising hand. Unanimous. I'll open it up to citizen comments. Oh, did we get anybody online that?
Mary Ryan is online. Mary Ryan Krieger is online.
We'll open it up then to citizen comments. Nobody wants to come forward. And nothing online, I guess. Okay, I'll close the citizen comments and go to our new business, and we'll start out with where we left off last time, I guess. Solo growth boundaries with Rob. If you're ready to do your presentation. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Well, good morning, everyone. And so, I mean, we did discuss this a lot last week or last month, but I'll kind of run through quickly the presentation. This is pretty much the presentation we made to SoLoco. And I don't think that necessarily I need to sell the idea that planning regionally is a good idea, you know, especially to this group. But I think that we all recognize, and certainly we went through this 15 years ago, that, you know, planning jointly and having a shared land use vision is something that is vital for this region, especially with the growth that we're experiencing, the concerns about, you know, the changing character of the community, and the ability for us to, you know, work together to make sure our policies complement and match each other. You know, that this is a vital thing for our region, given our growth and the precious historic, cultural, and natural resources that we want to be able to protect and continue. So the SoLoco put together what they call the growth subcommittee, and the basic charge for us was pretty general. They wanted us to look at all the comprehensive plans and look at such issues as shared growth boundaries, you know, looking at harmonizing land use policies and different things across the region. So the growth subcommittee started out pretty much at the staff level we had some meetings, but we kind of realized early on that we had several challenges for this being a staff effort. One was simply we all have our day jobs, even though this is certainly an important thing that we need to be doing. We're all busy, and it's the amount of work and decisions necessary to move this forward are pretty sizable. But the other thing is that we didn't want to, at the staff level, come up with a great vision and plan, present it to the elected officials, and then not really have ownership. It's one thing for us to all agree at the staff level, but we want to make sure that the elected officials and decision makers and stakeholders are on board. And so we kind of retold this idea to make it more of a proposal that we do some groundwork early on, but we would have a workshop or series of workshops where the elected officials and stakeholders actively engage in some of the questions and issues that we want to address. And then coming out of that, we would have a vision or steps to achieve that vision. I think we're all aware that we are dealing with tremendous population growth, and we're seeing a trend where the growth is in the southern part of the county, it's moving west. And then in the northern part of the county, we're seeing steady growth here. And I think we're all aware, certain areas of the county, we're seeing a lot of multifamily, a lot of residential growth in the northern part of the county. And that, of course, has consequences. And another thing that we looked at is residential building permit activity, rather than singly within one jurisdiction, just looking across the region at both Beaufort and Jasper County. And, just on any given year, we have a tremendous amount of permit activity, for residential dwellings. And as you can see from this, Hardyville is, by far the front runner. I mean, and this follows that trend that our growth is moving west. Bluffton is still growing, but they're beginning to fill out the approved development that they did a couple of years ago. Hardyville is just getting started. So, we're seeing trends in that way. And I thought this was interesting. I think anyone in Beaufort would know there's a tremendous amount of multifamily permit activity, and that reflects. This is just a snapshot of 1 year. If this were previous year, it might show Port Royal with more of those permits, but there's a lot of residential growth going on in the county. And given this rate of growth, when we look at, this is just the southern part of the county, but when we look at the capacity, when I say capacity, I don't mean that we have the capacity of roads or infrastructure, but in approved development that, people have the entitlement to develop these dwelling units. So we look south of the Broad in Beaufort County, Bluffton, Hardyville, and Jasper. There's 53,000 potential future dwelling units in all the PUDs, subdivisions. Now, some of this, the growth is a little further south. There's a lot of, the Riverport, Sherwood, and Hardyville. That is more along the state line and on I-95. It's almost, I think, Chuck in our office said it was Port Wentworth 2.0. I mean, it's just taking what is going on in Savannah and moving it across the state line. But there's a lot of growth that's happening right at our doorstep and affecting, 170, the roads that we share, that is really going to have an impact. And so, and I also want to acknowledge the help that we've had from Beaufort Jasper Water Sewer Authority. They have really stepped up their game in planning in the last couple of years, and Taylor Logan, and also Dana Bauer with the Sentinel Landscape. We sort of have the three of us have kind of coordinated this work recently, and so there's a huge impact on sewer and water, and it is, it's not necessarily, and I can, Taylor can speak to this better than I can. It's not a question of availability, it's a question of the amount of money that needs to go into infrastructure to serve future demand and what that means in terms of dollars and, eventually those costs are passed on to developers and consumers. So that has a real impact, as we grow into the future. This, I think this was that. Yeah, it will not be loading. There was we could skip over this for right now. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Okay. This is kind of showing over time, not only where we are growing, with residential and commercial growth, which is the black on this map, but there has been great efforts in land preservation. And this shows over a 20-year lapse how much land we've taken up with growth, but also how we have been able to preserve land in the future. And I think this kind of is a bit of a, it's a concern, but also brings a little bit of hope in that, if we're proactive, with our land use policies, but also, we do have with Beaufort and Jasper County land preservation programs, and we're very strategic in preserving land. These two can go hand in hand to help us grow smarter into the future.
What's the black again?
The black is growth, yeah. And I don't know, it doesn't quite show up to the magnitude. I mean, there's a lot of growth. I think this is showing over that time where that future growth is.
Is that yellow spot in the middle, is that Gregory, Nick?
Yes,
Okay.
so this is showing with each year, the new parcels that came online in preservation. So that's one of our latest big acquisitions, and the first one with the green space program. And then also, the military, and Mary Ryan is online and can answer any questions you have concerning this, but encroachment is a big issue, and it goes beyond simply the airport overlay district. So there's a designation called sensitive landscape, which is really the whole area of interest for the installations in Beaufort County. And Dana Bauer is the lead staff person for that. And so that just is once again, another reason that planning jointly is so important, because, we identify as a military community, but also they're a major driver of economic development. And so, that's another reason that planning jointly is so important. And then this also has impacts on, issues with nursing shortages, and the people that were needed to provide medical services. This is an issue across the board, but when you're growing quickly, it only accentuates these concerns. And also with our rising housing costs, it becomes more and more difficult for, to attract people like nurses, or there's so many, people who staff medical services who are not necessarily in that higher income bracket, but need housing that, that is affordable to them. And so this is something that is definitely a regional concern. And then, of course, and I don't even know how much I need to go into this, we know that growth has had a major impact on our roads and our infrastructure. And we have shared corridors like 170, where we are now seeing the impacts of that growth. I was, when I started here, 278 was the biggest concern. And so we had to put a lot of money into widening that to 6 lanes. And that took almost a decade to finalize those improvements. 278 still has problems, but now 170 is the new 278. And 170 is even more crucial because it's a lifeline, not only between residents of northern Beaufort County or southern Beaufort County to get back and forth, but to get to Savannah, to get to other destinations that are south. So, this is a huge concern that we all share. I think, over time, the less ability we have to move around, it's going to impact quality of life and the ability to attract, one of the ways that we benefit from our, we're able to account for affordable housing issues is the ability for people to drive or, to be able to travel to their job and find affordable housing elsewhere. And unless that becomes an option, that problem is only going to increase. And then all the concerns about the lack of affordable housing get increased as well. And so I think with this group, if we're all aware, we have a great history of regional planning. 15 years ago, we adopted actually it's getting closer to 20 years, if you can believe it, the Northern Beaufort County Regional Plan. Before that time, we really did not have any kind of shared vision between the city of Beaufort, town of Port Royal, and Beaufort County. And this was an incredible accomplishment because at the start of the process, we had people who could barely sit in the same room with each other. And at the end, we had it was a compromise. It was a consensus and compromise that we had to build. And we now have kind of a shared future land vision and shared acknowledgement of growth boundaries and what happens within and outside of those growth boundaries. And this has really, I think, been a benefit to the region and kind of got us beyond a sticky spot that we had in the early 2000s, where we were growing and there was a concern about lack of coordination of growth. And then we also have, the work that we've done, the joint land use studies for the military installations, other efforts like, the SoLoco stormwater design manual. All of these are incredible accomplishments for the region. And so building off this, we see we would like to continue that effort in having a shared vision for Beaufort County, Jasper County, and municipalities. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're talking about is rather than a full-blown plan, which I know as a planner, I don't necessarily have an appetite to go back and do all the official steps that are involved in that. I think it would be a great effort because it would get us all together. And maybe that's something that coming out of these workshops, we might decide is an important next step. But I think that the formula we're looking at is some sort of maybe a one-day event or 2 half-day events where we have an independent facilitator, elected officials and stakeholders are invited, and then working through some difficult questions having to do with growth and shared concerns that we have for the future of our county. And then coming out of that, some recommendations about what the next steps are. It could result in a general future land use vision for the area, identifying areas that we think are good for preservation or keeping more rural, identifying those areas where we want to target future growth and affordable housing, and looking at some sort of mechanism, whether it's an intergovernmental agreement, kind of like we did with the Northern Regional Plan, that would help, solidify that and help us to commit to it as a region. And so this is what we're recommending. And there's an interesting aside here. Those of you who are involved in the Northern Regional Plan, I don't know if you remember Greg Dale, but he was our facilitator. We worked for McBride Dale Clarion. And he invited me several years ago to Williamson County, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. I think it's where all the wealthy country music singers live. And you're familiar with that area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he invited me there because the municipalities and communities within Williamson County were looking at revising their growth boundaries. And so they devised a step they called it a symposium, but it's very similar. They didn't do a full-blown plan, but they did a series of workshops that led to a vision. And so he invited me to talk about some of our successes in Beaufort County, which was, it was an honor to be able to do that. And Greg contacted me recently to say that they were successful in moving forward and getting their growth boundaries revised. And so I kind of saw this as we inspired them, and so they maybe can inspire us through the work that they did, you know, that they were able to do this shared vision with, I believe it's 7 different entities that were involved in that. But so that's generally the presentation that we gave to Soloco. What they directed us to do was to come up with a work program and also a formula. If we were to move forward with this, what it would mean in terms of each jurisdiction contributing to the process. And we presented at the April meeting some a proposal and some numbers. They asked us to refine them a little more, to take another look at the formula. And so we have that we're going to be presenting next Tuesday. But what we're generally looking at is to get a independent facilitator in here to do the background work necessary. They can build off of a lot of the efforts that we've done at the staff level. And then to conduct the workshops, we're looking at somewhere up to 75,000. And when we look at how you spread that cost among the region, among the jurisdictions, it is very reasonable. I don't have the numbers with me, but we first started with 100,000, just looking at that. And the biggest cost burden was Beaufort County, and I think it was 43,000. City of Beaufort, Port Royal were below 10,000. So it's not really the cost. I think what we see as the benefit, or our recommendation of staff, is that all of us would have a stake in the outcome. If we contributed, and this is a formula based on population, so just across the board. So that's where we're going to be presenting to Soloco on Tuesday with those revised numbers that we're still working on at the staff level. And then, so that's kind of where we are. We're excited about the prospect. I think there's other efforts going on. The Greater Island Council on Hilton Head is proposing a more involved joint regional planning effort. I guess what we're saying, and we're kind of looking at that recommendation from them, they gave that at the last Soloco meeting, is that we think there's an opportunity to start this process, because if you get everyone in the room and we start to look at what are the challenges we're facing and the steps we need to take, that further refines, do we want to do a full-blown plan, or do we want to focus on certain things that we think that as a region we can benefit by working together? So that's kind of where we are right now, and certainly want to entertain any questions.
think that's a great presentation. I definitely want to get it and spend more time taking a look at it. I have 2 quick things. One is Williamson County, believe it or not, had like 26 county commissioners on their board. So you talk about trying to get things done. It was always a challenge, and I had to present many times before that. But the other more important thing I think to me is Beaufort City of Beaufort is going to be, when we get done with our code shortly, I hope, we'll be getting into our comp plan. And our comp plan that was done, 3 years ago, it was kind of, had a lot of public input, but it was very quick. And going through it, coming up here, I'd really like to have the benefit of the entire county and the input that you're trying to get to. So I think it'd be really important if you're gonna have these, reviews, kind of either do that before or as we're trying to do the comp plan itself, for us anyhow. And a lot of that would have also, understanding what all our individual growth boundaries are. We always have discussions about, but it'd be great if we could, as part of this, get that done. In my mind, that's how.
Yeah, the county is kicking off. We have a 5-year review of our comp plan. We're kicking it off this summer. So,
We'll all be doing it at the same time.
Yeah.
Which really be good. Other questions?
Rob, and you said you were thinking either one day or a half day, with the price for a half day, and in other words, that means the guy's gotta be here 2 days. Does the price change?
yeah, well, we talked with some consultants about, and it's a hard thing to pin down numbers because, but we did look at the option of both a full day, 1-day event too, and that got us into that $75,000 range. The advantage of 2 days, and this is a tough, it's a choice that we can make, the elected officials can make it how they want to proceed forward. We had last fall what they call a regional accelerator for resilience. And we had a really good turnout, but there were a lot of people that could only make half the day. So they took part in the morning and didn't really get into the big decision making that happened at the end of the day and vice versa. So that then the disadvantage of the 2-day is it's a greater cost, but also what if somebody could only make one of them? It's then requiring somebody to be able to be available for both.
Half day. I was one of those that only made a half day.
Yeah, I mean, it's still good, and it's still, we've got a lot of good input, but I think if you're looking at what is elected officials and, the people who were asking to be involved are very busy, and is it easier to reserve a day or reserve 2 half days?
Sometimes it's good to, for a half day, you have the other half the day or the rest of the day before the next meeting to digest what you heard that morning, kind of, rethink things.
Yeah.
You threw out a scary number of new units coming on board, 54,000. Kind of stuck there. Pardon?
Oh my God.
This is just south of the
Yeah,
road.
yeah. And so, you have any kind of a breakdown of the regions
East and
that
north.
those numbers are coming from?
Well,
And how you got to those numbers?
yeah, I think we had it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see it from here, it's all.
Oh, yeah. Now, this isn't, well, yeah, I think maybe that is, we combined a lot of them, like, Palmetto Bluff, New Riverside. That's a big region of Bluffton, and it's probably that and the area around Pritchardville are growing the fastest now. So we have those numbers, but Hardyville has by far the largest share of that growth.
West Oregon, East Oregon.
Yeah, and those are the ones that, as a county, I think concern us the most is because they're right along 278, 170 and sharing corridors that we all use.
But what are the numbers based on?
So they're based on the number of approved units. So it could either be a subdivision where not every lot has been built on, or it could be a approved plan unit development where there's a future phase, the total number might be 5,000 units and they've only built 2,500. So the number would be based on the remaining 2,500.
Okay, so that's just approved. Do you have any kind of mechanism for projection in following years?
No, we haven't done that as part of this presentation. This is more what we're point we're getting across is that without changing any laws, without any rezoning, annexation, this is what's on the books today. Unless somebody, went through, it's very difficult once you've approved a PUD to go back on it. That's a
We're
difficult.
all finding that.
Yeah. So, and a lot of these, especially, they have accompanying development agreements, so legally you can't do that, but even politically, that is a difficult political ask, when you've approved a certain amount. So I guess it's getting the point across that, without doing anything, this is what's on the books today. And so as we grow in the future, or if we want to look at this bigger picture, what additional land would we consider for future growth? And where do we really want to draw the line as far as land that we want to preserve or keep rural or keep from urbanizing?
I think all that's important, but also infrastructure is hugely important because we're already being impacted by that. And like you said, when you got into that, we all know that. But how do?
Yeah, we're following closely. There's legislation at the state level for adequate public facilities that gives more teeth to local jurisdictions to time growth with the provision of infrastructure. And that's kind of what as a county, we're facing. We've had several rezoning applications along the 170 corridor that, based on where they were located in our comprehensive plan, they met our future land use goals, but we all knew that the 170 is already clogged, and we have school capacity issues and things like that. And so, from when we were making a recommendation at the staff level, yes, it meets the comprehensive plan as far as the future land use plan, but there are all these infrastructure issues. And so I think with that legislation, and that's certainly a direction that we're looking at the county is putting more emphasis on that timing of infrastructure than simply looking at a map and saying, this is where a future node of activity should occur, because it makes sense geographically, but until the infrastructure is there or until that area is ready to grow, maybe that needs to, be dormant until, we're able to support that growth. And then there's a lot of areas in the county that probably meet that description.
Hilton had used to have that in the 90s until they put in what do you call the highway, the toll road that goes.
Yeah, the cross highway.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually, it's my understanding, I don't know, I don't have all the details, but I think that they did a moratorium based on the installation of that cross island. Which is, I always use that as an example. When you have a moratorium, it's good to have you need to have a goal,
Yeah.
to say, okay, once this is done, then we'll have the capacity to serve all this future growth.
We have any numbers traffic wise in terms of putting a moratorium? In other words, this is the road capacity of 170. This is a cap. Can't have any more development because it just can't handle it.
Yeah.
And then you would institute a moratorium, and as the infrastructure was improved, then you could permit it. But something's got to be done because the first sign of your quality of life going down the tubes is traffic.
Yeah.
And we got it on 170.
And we need public transportation too.
Absolutely. Referendum didn't pass, so I don't know. I don't know what the burden would be on the individual municipalities and on the county if you had to fund that.
But on the other hand, widening highways is expensive too.
Well, it'd be tough to widen some places because you allow development right up on the road.
Right.
Does anyone remember how long it took to widen 170? I remember when it was just 2 lanes, but
To build a bridge.
and build it took a while.
Well, they had that company that was,
10 years.
but wasn't okay. They were in bankruptcy or something, and there was a lot of problems with the construction company.
Oh, yeah.
Beaufort, maybe, I think.
Yep.
10 years.
Any other questions, Rob? Any further questions? I guess, Rob, is there any?
I have one more, just, Rob, when are you thinking about having this symposium? You have a time?
If we all get on board with it, when how soon?
I think next fall would be great, but, you know, I think what we were hoping and timing is getting tight now, but if we got this idea out there prior to us putting our budgets together, you know, then there's an opportunity to set aside those funds. I know we're all getting to the wire, and I don't know logistically when we present this on Tuesday at Soloco, we'll see what kind of direction we get from them, whether they forward, but I don't think it's a huge ask in terms of funds. I think it's, you know, especially if it's divided among each of us by population.
And it could be more expensive by not doing it.
Yeah, that's,
It's a choice.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, in the future referendum, probably gonna be a lot more pressure to approve something, next time out, because everybody's experiencing what's going on now, so.
It's hard to get to Savannah from
Mhm.
here now because of that.
I think if you put your numbers to the public, they'd all be right. Okay. Any other questions, anybody from?
Okay. I just don't think that, timetable of the fall is sort of far off. I personally believe it should be done much sooner. But, you know, I understand funding, et cetera. But I think it's crucial. Several meetings we've gone to, people are questioning growth in Beaufort County, and, you know, it's hard to, dismiss that issue. And the sooner we get some data, the better. I've been facing the question of a moratorium on 170 as the chairperson of the Natural Resource Committee, and basically want to do something, but my hands are tied, so we can't do anything until we get good information and stuff. And I think that's where we are right now. So,
Well, Rob, do you see the symposium as kind of a kickoff for then collectively having additional meetings to get towards resolution on items? You're not going to get resolution in 2 days.
Yeah, I think it's, it, I almost hate to say it, almost remains to be seen. I mean, I think that you can get to some general agreements about, you know, a land use vision, or, you know, it could be that there are math exercises involved in that. And coming out of that are some recommendations for general agreements. You know, maybe it starts out as sharing information, or there being certain, I'm just throwing out ideas, certain areas of concern, like let's say the 4622 corridor, and, you know, between Richland and Beaufort County, that development along there, we have some sort of regional agreement where we all review and make comments, or, I mean, there's just a number of ways and levels of detail that this could be. I would love to see something similar to Northern Beaufort County, where there are lines on a map, you know, that we say, okay, this is, we all agree we're not going to annex beyond this point, or we're going to, you know, or upzone or things like that. And there's some sort of agreement that, you know, we're, can't say that everyone is ready for something like that, but that would be a great accomplishment.
Yeah, I would agree. With, I know you're busy and you're saying fall, what would be the soonest that something like this could happen to go along with what yours?
Well, we would have to get everyone to agree, and then the next step would be, this is kind of up to each local jurisdiction, whether they want to have this an official action of their jurisdiction, through their elected officials. And then staff would then work to put together a RFP or RFQ and then procure somebody to do this work. That's a good month and a half. And then getting them on board. And then, I guess just by looking at that and then looking at people's availability in the summer, that's why I came up with the fall. But if we dropped everything and started that work, we couldn't do it sooner, but I think it would be.
Stress on you.
Well.
Well, just the procurement process, takes time, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to have a month, for people to respond. Rates, get a selection team together, rate them. We probably want to have a good cross-section of jurisdictions involved in that.
The only group that's so local, if I remember right, it didn't seem to want to participate was Hilton Head.
You said they did not.
They didn't see, but that was just one person from Hilton. So it might, there, but if I remember right from the meeting. Is that what you remember?
Yeah.
We talked about it, yeah. Okay. But I think in the big picture, maybe they could be brought in. They should be. You gotta get to Hilton Head
And
through all.
impacts them as well.
So you're gonna start the process now and just figure out when.
We're gonna see what kind of direction Soloco gives us on Tuesday.
Okay.
And then I guess that'll determine.
Let me ask a question if I may.
Mhm.
As municipal and county leaders, we, plan and prepare to address growth. At what point do we get to the, point where we start thinking in terms of prohibiting the growth, stopping the growth? Right now, we're trying to control and manage, okay? And granted, everybody wants some growth because it's beneficial for the county and the municipal operations. But when we look at the results of the growth, the traffic and congestion that we're dealing with, at some point, I think we should look at, okay, how do we prohibit some of this growth? When do we get to that point?
Hard to imagine legally that,
We can do that?
yeah. Whatever, I think you get a lot of litigation involved in that.
We can do moratoriums, but they're temporary.
Yeah.
And we can permanent.
Or you keep buying property.
So,
We'll buy it all
Grants,
up.
grant penny. Exhaust your grant penny, all of your resources, and buy and development land. That's already got funds on it. That was supposed to be what we initially were doing with the
with the green space.
with the green space.
Mhm.
So,
The problem is you have to have a willing landowner too.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, that is a rather important part of it.
That may still happen now. Jasper County has the Greenbelt Fund, so.
Well, Chelsea's off the table.
That's a huge one.
I'm not really concerned about restricting growth. I do believe that we gotta have growth. Maintain a viable community.
As long as it's not on St. Helena.
It's one per bill.
But I am really in favor of what I call vertical growth.
Yeah.
Versus horizontal.
I agree with you.
I think we gotta maintain that vibrant rural community, just if nothing else, many of us like Venice. We gotta have the deer running around here somewhere. So we gotta maintain a little bit of forest land, et cetera, rural development to allow that. But we can do vertical growth, and within that jurisdiction, you allow the growth.
It's also more expensive you allow it to sprawl out and shelter and everything else, because you got wide highways, then you gotta build schools. You don't get enough tax dollars to pay for that growth. That growth doesn't generate enough tax dollars. For
Well,
the service.
having grown up in Charleston, they went vertical and the roads didn't widen. And so you've got all those people that have cars, you gotta get on 2-lane streets in some cases. You can't move.
No, I mean, you
It's
gotta.
not always good.
Right.
I get what you're saying. You don't want sprawl, but you ought to have areas where you cannot develop, period. Just identify those ahead of time. Those don't get developed. Whatever they are, use a green penny to buy them up. But going vertical it can change the character of the community.
It does.
And it does.
No, it's vertical within your constraint.
You can do infill to a point. But when you go vertical, sometimes I'd hate to come over the bridge, Woods Bridge in Beaufort. You have 2 steeples, which I think is kind of a nice looking view to start seeing.
No, I agree with that, yeah.
But it doesn't have to be vertical, there could be more density too.
And
That's what I mean.
more,
Yeah.
more in the infill redevelopment.
Yeah.
Is really the answer for a lot of them, and it's.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to take space.
Kurt, you had a,
I was just wondering, should we get like DOT involved and maybe the state
Oh, yeah.
and Senate representatives, because they seem to be.
Sure, we all have another side. Was your Jasper, or infrastructure.
You're talking about the stakeholders who would be involved? Yeah, that's definitely, you're looking at.
Make legislative changes then in the domain.
There's no legal action of that.
Well, I mean, this is an option. I mean, obviously, you can sue him in domain based on public infrastructure, that sort of thing. We addressed it recently relative to economic development, that you couldn't. So if we're taking in legislation to address the shortcomings in infrastructure prior to development, you can contemplate changing legislation to expand the power of the domain.
well, it sounds like everything's gonna be coming out of this symposium that, you're putting together, so I guess it's pretty important. Okay, any other questions for Rob on that? Seeing none, Rob, I guess you're gonna tell us all about the results of the plastic bag survey.
This is not a detail, but more kind of showing you the direction we're going in. Yep, there you go.
By the way, did everybody participate in the questionnaire on plastic bags?
Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I did too.
Okay. Well, I guess as you're all aware, about 5 years ago, we adopted a plastic bag ordinance, and at that time, Coastal Conservation League was really to be commended in getting all the jurisdictions to get on board with these changes. I think we've all recognized that there are some issues that maybe we want to address and look further, because we know that there's still plastics accumulating in our waterways, along our roads. And, being a coastal county, we have even a greater interest in reducing the accumulation of waste like this. And so at the direction of the Natural Resources Committee, we wanted to take another look at this. Staff was charged at looking at what some other communities are doing to restrict single-use plastic and styrofoam items, especially with food service. And so one of the first steps that we did is we talked to some of the other jurisdictions, especially the city of Charleston, which has recently adopted some additional restrictions on plastic waste. And what we learned from them is that they went through a public process. You know, they didn't take this lightly and just kind of look at what another community is doing. You know, they went into a deep dive into surveying both residents and businesses about what their interest level was in restricting certain plastic items. And so learning that from Charleston, what we recommended at that point was to do a similar survey. And so that's what we did. And this went live in February. I think, what was the final date? It was like early April. So we did some survey work, and there were two different surveys. One went to residents, one was available to residents and one was available to businesses, because we really wanted to gauge, residents have specific concerns. Maybe they're concerns about litter, maybe it's concerns about their own consumption, or what they're seeing is a huge accumulation of plastic bags or cups or things like that. But businesses, obviously, they're concerned about, their ability to operate, what it might mean to the bottom line if they are facing further restrictions in some of these. And so we targeted these two groups. And what we found out, some initial data, they said, January 13th to April 3rd. Boy. Yeah.
I thought it was February.
Yeah. We got over 6,000 consumer responses and then 138 business responses. And so what we looked at in the survey was not only the types of uses or types of items that we would like to restrict, and so we divided up into plastic bags, styrofoam containers, styrofoam cups, straws, and then I keep forgetting people call it, I guess, plasticware and silverware, but it's made out of plastic. Utensils, that's the word. So we had these different items that also looked at different methods of restrictions. And what we learned from Charleston is it's not simply a question of banning an item. There are different levels of how an item is controlled or restricted. The most extreme being not allowing, a plastic bag of a certain thickness, as a single use. But there are other things like straws where, to reduce straws, people have very strong opinions, especially if they've ever had one of those paper straws and it disintegrates halfway through using it. But in this case like that, the restriction may be that businesses provide them by request only, which is a way that reduces the accumulation of them, but still allows people, if they want a plastic straw, they can get one. And interesting thing is we learned from Charleston that those types of restrictions were popular with businesses because it meant that they were the amount of inventory that they had to have was reduced, and that it saved them money. So we looked at these different types of restrictions, and so we posed the item and then the level of regulation. So what generally we're finding, and I guess we kept this very basic as this presentation because we're still crunching the numbers. But what we're finding is that certain items like the plastic bags, also what they call clamshell styrofoam containers, there was a strong interest in the survey results about banning or restricting those, or requiring paper or different material. Yeah.
Material.
But other items like the utensils and the straws, there was much more support for the by request only. And so what we're doing is we want to finalize that information, and then we're going to put together a draft ordinance and bring that forward to council,
Into the municipalities.
yeah, and in municipalities.
To see, comments, like, if y'all remember back, when we did the annual ordinance way back then, how we met with all the municipalities, all the, yeah. It's a
How we
public.
did the batteries. That's really how we did the batteries with CCL too.
And there are other steps, from talking to Charleston, they were able to get grants that had like clamshells made out of like compressed cardboard or different materials that they were able to, help businesses, if they wanted to, yeah, and have a truck. The other thing that they did was having it's not a one day passes and all of a sudden it's the law, that there was a trial period, a grace period to kind of get things up and running, because we recognize that, people have inventory, they want to use it up. They have to get comfortable with other sources of materials and come on board. So it's kind of a combination of restrictions, but also, working and working with businesses and being very positive about it. But that's kind of where we are. We're excited about the results because it's not just a question of yes or no, it's a question of, what types of items and what type of steps we need to take. And we're beginning to see trends from the community and businesses, and hoping that this can kind of direct us to where we want to go in the future. That's kind of where we are.
I heard somebody say that real men don't use straws, better take care of half.
Well, my own personal, I don't use straws, but I get handed them all the time.
Yeah.
And they just sit there and they don't get it's not like they take it back and give it to another customer. It's
Right.
They put a top on top. Give it to you, not the top,
yeah.
Well, that's a good point then, because then if you have to ask for a straw, probably take care of part of that problem too.
Yeah.
Good point.
Real men would never ask for straw.
Right.
Yeah.
Any questions for Rob? Anybody in the audience? Okay, well, thank you. And I think you wanted to make a,
Yes, just real quick, you may have noticed that I've been absent the past 3 months. I had some serious medical procedures, and I appreciate those that reached out to me at this table and also in the community through my surgery and through my recovery. So thank you.
Back at 100%.
Well, I'm about halfway there. It's about a 6-month healing process. I was in MESC yesterday, and they said you're about halfway there. I had open heart surgery.
But you're looking good, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
glad to see you back.
Thank you. Good to be back. Here.
Okay, well, we're open for discussion. Anybody has anything on their mind, on their agenda?
What's the topic for the next agenda?
Move to that already. Everybody wants to go home long weekend. Okay, well, yeah, let's talk about the topics for next agenda. I know that pretty soon the transportation, North Regional Transportation Committee is going to have some results, and I don't know if it'll be next month or not. Rob, do you have a feeling for that? Right, you were in the meeting.
Oh, they are.
That's what I'm
Yeah, they're coming next month.
Okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
all right, so I guess,
Yeah. To give an update on the Northern Beaufort Transit, yeah. So we're set for June, at least for that, yeah.
We just had a workshop yesterday.
yeah, I think
Interesting.
that'll probably be a pretty long, it might be a long meeting, to have all the discussion on that, so. Is there anything else that anybody would like to put on the agenda for the next meeting?
That'll probably take up the whole meeting.
I think it'll probably take a good part of it, because there's a lot that we're covering.
The back.
I would say the next couple months.
Where are we? Where are we?
This is May
We're talking
right
about
June meeting, yes. And I think they're gonna be trying to get out just to community events and start to talk about the results of that. That just get public participation too. Okay. Well, think about agenda items then coming up that you might wanna see covered. Anything else before we adjourn? Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Adjourn. Thank you very much.